The eighth house. It's a good house for astrologers. Also a house that's good for anyone interested in the occult, in psychic phenomena. The eighth house is related to Scorpio and also Mars. The key words for this house are hidden resources and longevity. And hidden resources, this is the support that you can get from partners or partnerships. For example, if you want to see the state of your partners, well, look at the eighth house, because it is the second house from the seventh. The seventh house represents partners, spouses, business partners. The second from the seventh is the eighth. And just like the second from the first represents your resources and how you can make your money, the second from the seventh, the eighth, shows the potential influences on partnerships, wealth, and resources, and capacity to provide for themselves. The eighth house is one that reflects the hidden aspects of our life. It deals with the conjugal bond between couples, meaning how does a person connect deeply to someone through sex or other intimate sharing. And if there's malefic influences there, well, it can make it difficult to have that even occur. And if it does occur, if there are malefic influences there, it can be not as pleasant as you would like it to be. Good planets to have in the eighth for enjoying sex would be Venus exalted in the eighth, just for an example. Or even Jupiter. It brings some more enjoyment to it. But if you get a malefic Mars or Saturn, well, that brings more malefic influences to that area of life. People who've experienced sexual abuse or difficulty in that area have these negative influences of malefic planets to the eighth house. The eighth house can also show interest in the occult. It can give good skills in research, analysis. It's more so digging into things deeply. Eighth house people with planets in the eighth house or a strong eighth house, they're a different breed. And I think they might get along with each other. But one thing that you can notice about them is that they really just can't ever really leave things alone. Meaning that they're always trying to figure out more or explore more. And the eighth house being a crisis-oriented house, oftentimes if there's not a crisis going on and we have a person with a emphasized eighth house or eighth house lord or planets in the eighth house, something will occur to generate a crisis. So eighth house can be crisis-oriented, which is why Scorpio itself, when we have a Scorpio ascendant, it's said that Scorpios typically grow and make progress due to crisis, being pushed out of their boundaries. Now, the eighth house is also our unspoken emotions, and I like to look at it as our deeper psychological nature. Good planets in or influence in the eighth house can bring a real sense of contentment and psychological peace very deeply within an individual. Malefic influences to the eighth house can make a person psychologically disturbed or have difficulty feeling at peace or safe. I think safe might be the best word there. Emotional anxiety and trauma can be connected with this eighth house. The eighth house, when it's prominent in someone's chart, they can have a very strongly sexual nature or appear that way. So, if you know someone who has a prominent eighth house and they're male, well, other men might not necessarily like them so much, especially when they're around women, assuming we're talking about heterosexual relationships here, because it'll almost be challenging to them. When we have females with a strong eighth house, they will easily attract men. It can be effortless. But that can make their effect on women a little bit more difficult, because not all women exude sexuality or exude this kind of confidence, being able to connect with males. And so it can invoke jealousy within the same sex sometimes. Not always. There needs to be other things there, but I've seen that happen often and heard about it through clients. So as we mentioned, the eighth house deals with other people's money. It deals with joint finances, the wealth of the partner. It can show issues with alimony, loans, tax and inheritance is a prime indicator. Well-supported 8th house, the person might get inheritance, and lots of it, or can be supported by inheritance. Now, the 8th house is a psychic house in the sense that it can give a person psychic skills, even psychological powers over others, which is what can make them manipulative or seem that way. It deals with death and beyond death states, meaning a capacity to think about, dwell upon, function in areas of life that deal with death, like hospice workers, people that work in traumatic situations or deal with crisis and trauma or benefit from crisis and trauma. Oftentimes they'll have an 8th house predominant. A lot of psychologists, trauma-related psychologists, have a prominent 8th house. Having the ascendant Lord in the 8th house can make one a good psychologist, one of those combinations there. But as I mentioned, with the 8th house, it can make a person somewhat crisis-oriented, which, if you're around them or you know them or you are one, you might know what I mean. But these are individuals who, again, can't leave things alone. It's hard for them to feel content in any given situation, dealing with the planet that's in the 8th house. So if we have the 10th Lord in the 8th, well, that almost always makes a person have difficulty feeling like they are doing the right thing, or there's always this sense of fear of change or destruction, or they'll do something to make a sudden crisis within their work. If we have the ruler of the 5th and the 8th, they can function that way with children. The ruler of the 7th and the 8th, they can make relationships very crisis-oriented. So whatever planet is in the 8th will naturally have some sort of weakness to it, in the sense that it'll create crisis. Something will suddenly change. So it's like you're going down the road, and let's say the indicator for your car engine is in the 8th house, and all of a sudden your car engine blows up. So it's a sudden crisis that occurs. So these aren't things that creep up on you. These are things that, wow, where did that come from? So pay attention to the planets in the 8th. Now, to figure out whether crisis is going to be beneficial or not, you need to consider the dignity of the planet. If the 8th Lord is in good dignity, if planets in the 8th are in good dignity, well, crisis can lead to possibly better things. So, again, true growth from crisis. If we have planets in bad dignity, or the 8th Lord is in bad dignity, well, then that crisis leads to heartbreak or suffering or difficulty, as we typically think of the 8th house. So, remember, changing crisis isn't always bad. Sometimes it leads to some very good things. That's dependent on planetary dignity. When you know someone who's always in crisis mode and never seems to get out of it, more than likely there's these influences in the 8th house, negative dignities, or the 8th Lord is in bad dignity itself. All right. Oh, yes, the 8th house is said to show a person's longevity. It shows our vitality. So support to the 8th house, good, strong 8th house, well then that supports our vitality. We can live longer. We have better health. The 8th house deals with chronic long-term illnesses. So if you want to consider what's in the 8th house or what's the 8th house influencing, and their bad dignity, that can show where there are chronic problems or chronic long-term illnesses, depending on the house indicated, the planets indicated, and what they mean. So specific indications for the 8th: our life force, our longevity, how we die, the means of death, experiences of death, the results of wills and legacies, insurance benefits, joint finances, the partner's money, gains from partnerships. The 8th house can deal with sexual strength, attractiveness, and potency. Negatively, it can deal with venereal diseases. The 8th house represents our sexual desires and our fantasies. And remember, the 8th house is what's locked away that we don't show people. So these are the things that come out when we're alone, either in an intimate relationship or by ourselves, those hidden, taboo fantasies or desires. Chronic and long-term illnesses of any kind, misfortunes, occult subjects, secretive matters. The 8th house is very much a house of controversy. So wherever the 8th house Lord goes can create controversial situations. 8th house Lord in the 10th, well then the career can be surrounded by controversy. 8th house in the second, there can be controversy around money, or you might have controversial speech. The 8th house can deal with intuition and psychic abilities. Now, the Karaka planet for the 8th house is Saturn, which means that when you check out the 8th house, you also want to check out Saturn. If you see mutual influences coming together on Saturn and the 8th house, that's what you want to talk about. The 8th house is a Dusthana house, or a suffering house. The 8th house is good for astrologers, especially when it's well placed. It's good for researchers, analysts. It's good for people working in professions where sexuality is needed. Also trauma and crisis. These are some of the key words there. People who have the 8th house influencing their career might also deal in estate planning, wills, legacies. And finally, keep in mind that, I know I've mentioned this before with the 6th house. The 6th house represents your enemies. The 8th house represents battles, fights. And the 12th house represents the results of your enemies and your battles. So again, considering legal battles or any kind of fights of any kind, look to the 8th house to see how's the battle going to go. Bad 8th house, death and loss, you're going to lose. Good 8th house, support to it. Okay, yeah, I think that's it.